Hey guys, so we got our direct messages working nicely. So we have a history of the people that we have chatted with. And there's one little thing that we're going to fix, and that's when we chat with a new user we just invited to a team, we don't see their username pop up here right away. And that's because we are caching this query, and then when we do a new one, we're reading from the cache, and we just need to update the cache. It's kind of a choice. If you want to update the cache, you can also just have the user have to refresh the page to see it here. But I'll show you in case you ever want to add an apps where you update your cache, which we have done before. And we're also going to be working on up here at the top. So if I click on Tom2, I don't see Tom2's username here. I see we want to see Tom2 there. So we're going to fetch Tom2's username here so we can see him and see that's who we're chatting with here. Okay, so let's get started. Now, if you don't know what the problem I was talking about with direct message, I'll show you right now. So I just created a new user called Jim and Jim2. So I'm going to invite Jim to the team, and then I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to direct message him. So you notice how I just had the refresh there, same exact thing. We need to update the cache if we wanted Jim to show up there when we invite people. So right here I have Jim's chat window, and I can say, hey Jim, and I don't see the message here. That's because we haven't done subscriptions yet. We're going to be doing that, but I don't see Jim pop up here either. But if I refresh, we see Jim, sure enough, right there. So let's add Jim now. So the way we're going to do this is by adding an update function to our mutation here. So I'm in the direct messages page, and this is where we're creating a direct message. So we're just going to update the direct message members afterwards. This is very similar of how we updated the channels list with our add channel modal. And I'm just going to copy this update and this optimistic response because we're going to do basically the same thing. Now, our optimistic response, we basically return what we expect the server to return. For this mutation, we're returning true or false. True if it succeeds, false if it doesn't. So I'm just going to return true here because I expect the server for it to go through. And then we actually don't even need to look at the data returned to do this. And I'm going to get rid of that. Give this a save. So here we're getting an error with team IDX. I'm going to call this team IDX2 just because if we look up here, we have team IDX as well. Okay, so first thing we're doing is we're reading the me query, which is good. That's what we want to update. And then we are finding the team which we want to update, which is basically the current team. We're using team ID here. Instead of using team ID, I'd instead want to grab the team and call .id on it. And we're doing that here as well. I think we want to do team.id just because if we get a bad team ID here, we are defaulting our team. Alright, so here we go, team.id. So we're finding the index of that team, and then here we are finding that team, which we just, grabbing the index of it. And then here we were pushing a channel. Now for us, we want to push a direct message member. And if we look at our query, that's these guys here, direct message members, and we're going to push an ID and a username. So I'm going to just have a little object here. We also need to pass in the type name, which is a user. And I capitalize it because that's the name of the type. And then I'm going to have an ID. So the ID of this is the receiver ID because that's who we're sending the message to. And that's user ID. And then the username, we actually don't have the username of the user we're sending to right now. That's why we need to make, we just got an error, but at the top there we're not fetching the user yet. So I'm just going to say someone here for now, and then we're going to fill that in a little bit. Now this query looks like it works, this update, and it will for inviting new members, but it'll break if we've already chatted with this member before. Because the member will already be in direct message members, and we're just going to re-push him on. So we don't want to do that. We want to check whether the user is already in direct message members. So we're going to say const not already there. So we're going to write some kind of boolean, and we're going to say if not already there, then we're going to push on and then write to the update the cache, because we don't need to update the cache if we already have the member on the side. And the way we're going to check is we're going to copy this bit here, and we're just going to basically iterate through the members using the every function. And if you haven't seen this before, what it does is we're going to go through every single member, and we're going to say member not equal to user ID. And this user ID we grab up here, so this is the person we sent it to. So, and I'm going to say member.id here. So we're checking against each member. If that's not the member I sent the message to, then it will return true. So if every member in here is not the member I sent a message to, this will be true. If one member is, if this is equal to true somewhere, or not true, equal to false, which means the member is in here, then this returns false. So just a quick recap of if all of them are true, then it'll return true. If one of them is false, it'll return false. So that's how we're checking this. Now this user ID is actually a string. If we look up here, so we're just going to do a parse int on it, because our member ID is a integer. And it's mad because it just wants us to know which base it is. It's base 10. And now let's run this and see what happens. Alright, so let's invite people. I'm going to invite Jim too. Give him an add, refresh. I'm going to start direct messaging with Jim too. And here I'm going to say, hey Jim too. Hit enter, and we get an error. Cannot read property every of undefined. And looks like I forgot the S, direct message members, and forgot the S here. So we see our Jim 2 because we just messaged him. So let's create another user real quick so we can test it again. So I'm going to call this guy Jim 3. And let's invite him to the team. Alright. And now, same thing as how we're doing an update function. If you wanted to write an update function for invite people, we wouldn't have to refresh when we do this, but we'll leave that for you guys to try out. So we have this, I'm going to say, hey Jim 3, and cool, we see someone pop up here. Now, ideally we see the actual username, so when we fetch this, we're going to basically store it so we can use it here as well. So we're going to basically pause our progress with this and come back and change this to the right username in a second. Now I noticed how we get this missing field, create direct message, in true. I think what it's talking about is my optimistic response. See how we said type name mutation here? I think it just wants us to do that same thing maybe. Maybe not the type name, but at least the name of the mutation here. So I'm going to say the name of our mutation is create direct message. So create direct message returns true. I think that's what it means by missing the field create direct message. We'll see when we run this again if that goes away. So now how are we going to fetch the username right here? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add something to our me query. So instead of just running this me query, we're going to say const direct message me query is equal to GQL, and we're going to write our own custom me query, because what we want to run is this guy right here. Copy that. But we also want to fetch the username of the person we're about to message. So I'm going to say direct message me query. So this is me. The other thing I want to do is fetch a particular user. So I'm going to say query here. We're going to pass in a variable of the user we would like to get. So user ID we'll say. that's just going to be an integer. And then I don't know if we actually have fetching a user in our backend. Let's check. Nope. So let's say get user returns a user, and we're not going to say not null because if they give us a bad ID here, so user ID is an int, then we return null. So in our resolver, we're going to say copy this, get user, we're going to say user.find1, and we're going to say where, and we're going to say ID is equal to the user ID given here. Okay. So now we can grab that user. So get user, passing in that user ID. So user ID is equal to $user ID. And then here we're just going to fetch the username is all we really care about. So this thing we can grab up here. So we're going to have me and get user. So now get user, I can say from that, I don't know why this is red. Oh, it's a gang long. Oh, let's move this guy up here. It doesn't want to be, wants to be, because this is an absolute import, it needs to be above these relative ones. So now get user here, instead of passing someone's username into this, I'm going to say get user dot username, and same thing for our username down here. So get user dot username. Now down here, when we're querying, we need to pass in a variable, so variables, and this is going to equal to props, and we're going to return back. So user ID is going to be equal to props.params.user ID. So this props.params.user ID, this is coming from the header or the URL. Same thing as we're fetching up here. So match params user ID, so I need to add match in front of that. props.match.params. So that is whatever we put up here. Now we are definitely susceptible to errors if we have a bad user error or user ID up here and stuff. But let's see what's going on with this. I'm expecting variable user ID, but it was not found. We had this problem before. It didn't like how I was passing in the variables, and I changed it. So let me just see. Let's search my project real quick for variable and see where I'm doing this so we can copy how I did that. Props. So this is the user ID that did work. I think it's just reading my props. I don't think it's actually using the username here. Alright, where was I? Direct messages? Okay. So I don't think it's reading this props for some reason for the variables here. I don't know if it's because I need to put in options. Let's double check how they do it on Apollo GraphQL, because this should be a very simple thing where we just pass in through our props. So we're going to go to client, React, and our queries. So this is us passing through the props, and that's what I was doing wrong. We need to put variables inside the options. So it looks like by default it tries to read the variables from the props. That's kind of interesting. Alright, so now we get a new thing. So alright, so we're getting an error. Here is my server. Looks like my server variable user ID int was not provided. Props.match. Okay, so let's look at our network tab, and we're going to refresh, and I'm going to filter for GraphQL. Let's look at this request that we just made and see if we're passing in. Alright, so notice how our variables here are empty. So like I did before, we're going to just hard code this. So I have a 9. So I'm going to copy this and say 9 and see if that works. Then we know whether it's something of how we're doing it. So we still don't get the variables. I believe we're copying this. Oh, you know what? I think variables can't take a function like this. I think options takes it like this. There we go. I think that's what's my problem. Okay, so variables probably doesn't take props, but I know options can. I think that's where I was just messing up. And bam, that's where it was. Okay, so we see hashtag Jim3 here. So perfect. So we see our username here of who we're messaging. So if I go to Tom, I should see Tom there, and I do. Bob, cool. So now let's register a new user and try this all together. So I'm going to say Sally at sally.com. And let's try inviting her to the team. Whoops. Okay, invite, add user, refresh, and search for Sally, add Sally, and be, hey Sally. And awesome, we see Sally pop up here. If I refresh, I see the message there, and I see Sally stay there. Cool. So the next steps is to get this messaging to be fluent in real time. So similar to how we got it working with channels over here, and I can just be like, hey Bob, and Bob shows up here. We use GraphQL subscriptions for that. We're going to do that same thing here. So that's what we're working on in the next video. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, guys.